even before Michael Jordan won the title in 91. From 88 on, it was clear that Michael Jordan, even with Larry Bird or Magic Johnson winning championships, it was clear that Michael Jordan was the best player in the world. Larry Bird called him God in gym shorts.
Stephen A. Smith sounds completely fed up with where the GOAT debate has gone. For years, the argument around LeBron James versus Michael Jordan has felt endless, emotional, and impossible to settle. But now Stephen A. is drawing a hard line. No hypotheticals. No what-if scenarios. Just resumes, accomplishments, and results. And in his eyes, the conversation becomes much simpler when you stop arguing emotionally and start looking at the full body of work. He starts with Jordan's dominance. 6 championships. A perfect 6-0 finals record. 6 finals MVPs, 10 scoring titles. Defensive Player of the Year. 9 all-defensive first-team selections. And maybe most importantly, the aura that came with it. Jordan wasn't just winning, he was overwhelming the league. That's the angle Stephen A. keeps hammering. The argument isn't only about longevity or total statistics. It's about complete control over an era. It's about the fear factor. The inevitability. The sense that once Michael Jordan reached the biggest stage, the outcome already felt decided. And to Stephen A., that separates Jordan from everybody else. Because while LeBron's numbers are historic, his case is built differently. It's built on durability, versatility, consistency across decades, and sustained excellence over an incredibly long period of time. Jordan's case, meanwhile, is built on peak dominance and flawless execution in the finals. That's why this debate never actually ends. One side values longevity and total production. The other values perfection under pressure and total control at the highest level. And depending on what someone prioritizes, their answer changes immediately. Stephen A.'s frustration seems to come from the idea that some fans reduce the debate to raw numbers alone. To him, basketball greatness isn't just about accumulating stats over time. It's also about impact, intimidation, championships, defense, and defining moments that shape entire eras of the sport. That's why he keeps returning to Jordan's complete resume rather than just isolated statistics. At the same time, this is exactly why LeBron supporters push back so hard. Because from their perspective, surviving at an elite level for more than 2 decades, reaching 10 finals, becoming the all-time scoring leader, and remaining dominant across multiple generations of basketball is its own kind of greatness. And honestly, that's what keeps this argument alive year after year. One player represents sustained excellence over time. The other represents the highest competitive peak many fans believe the sport has ever seen. The numbers fuel the debate, but they don't end it.
The obvious, you do know that MJ has 6 titles, right? And LeBron has 4. You do know that, right? You do know that MJ was undefeated in all 6 NBA Finals appearances. Do you know that? You do know that Michael Jordan never allowed an NBA Finals series to get to a 7th game. Did you know that? I'm sure you did. Did you know he's a 10-time champion? And LeBron has won a scoring title 1 time? Did you know he's a 9-time first-team all-defensive player? LeBron James did that 5 times. Did you know that Michael Jordan is the former Defensive Player of the Year, 1988? LeBron James has never won a Defensive Player of the Year.
Stephen A. Smith then shifts the conversation towards something he believes separates Michael Jordan from almost everyone else in basketball history: complete dominance on both ends of the floor. He gives LeBron James credit. A lot of it, actually. Calling LeBron a legitimate number 2 all-time isn't criticism, it's still one of the biggest compliments possible in basketball. But Stephen A.'s point is that the distance between first and second still matters. And this is where he starts bringing in the postseason comparisons that make the debate so intense. He points to Jordan's ability to avoid collapse on the biggest stage. 6 finals appearances. 6 championships. No Game 7s in the finals. No best-of-7 playoff sweep losses during his championship runs. To Stephen A., those details aren't random statistics. They represent mentality, control, and competitive pressure at the highest possible level. That's the context he believes people ignore when the conversation turns entirely into career totals or longevity. Because in his view, greatness isn't only about how long you dominate. It's about how completely you dominate when everything is on the line. That's why Jordan's defensive resume matters so much in these conversations too. The scoring titles get most of the attention, but Stephen A. keeps circling back to the fact that Jordan was also one of the most feared perimeter defenders of his era. The combination of elite offense and relentless defense is what many older analysts believe elevated him into a different category historically. And that's where the debate becomes complicated for LeBron supporters. Because LeBron's greatness often comes from versatility, adaptability, and sustained excellence across multiple eras of basketball. Jordan's greatness, meanwhile, is often framed as maximum intensity at the absolute peak of competition. Neither resume is small. Both are historic. But Stephen A.'s argument is that Jordan's career contains fewer visible cracks when measured by championship pressure and complete two-way dominance. That's why he believes the conversation shouldn't automatically shift just because LeBron's cumulative numbers continue growing. To him, the debate is not only about quantity, it's about how overwhelming a player was at the height of their powers.
We're talking about what you do on both sides of the court, and we're talking about Michael Jordan, in my mind, being the greatest, but not throwing any shade on LeBron James because he's the worthy number 2. But he's about to get swept.
Stephen then reminds people of Jordan's early career struggles to emphasize that even when he lost,
the context matters too, and that's exactly where Stephen A. Smith believes a lot of modern debates lose nuance. Yes, Michael Jordan was swept early in his playoff career, but those losses came in best-of-5 series against the legendary Boston Celtics teams led by Larry Bird. Once the NBA fully shifted into the best-of-7 era, Jordan never got swept again. To Stephen A., that detail says something important about Jordan's evolution as a competitor. It speaks to resilience, growth, adaptation. Even when he lost, the feeling was always that he was climbing toward complete control of the league rather than searching for answers that never came. That's a huge part of Jordan's mythology. His rise happened during an era many older analysts describe as brutally physical and unforgiving. There was no shortcut through the Eastern Conference. No easy path through veteran dynasties. He had to go through teams like the Celtics and the bad boy Detroit Pistons before finally taking over basketball completely. And once he broke through, he never really gave the throne back. That's the narrative Stephen A. leans into heavily. Not just the championships themselves, but the way Jordan's career arc felt inevitable after a certain point. Every failure became fuel for the next leap forward. When he compares that to LeBron James, the argument becomes more layered. Because LeBron's path has always included more context, more variables, and more debate. Different teams, different eras, different roster situations, finals losses against historically stacked opponents, championships won in completely different circumstances. To LeBron supporters, those details strengthen his legacy because they show adaptability and sustained greatness over decades. But to Stephen A., those same details create too many what-if conversations surrounding the resume. What if certain teams stayed healthy? What if certain finals matchups changed? What if different roster moves happened? Jordan's story, in contrast, feels cleaner to many people. Simpler. More definitive. And that's why this debate never cools down. One career represents longevity and evolution. The other represents peak dominance and near-perfect competitive mythology.
and that's why fans who claim LeBron is the GOAT sound more emotional than rational.
By the way, Michael Jordan, he got swept twice, just like LeBron did. But it was in best-of-5 series in 86 and 87 to Larry Bird, McHale, Robert Parrish, Dennis Johnson, Danny Ainge, and those boys. In a best-of-5 series. Michael Jordan has never gotten swept in a best-of-7 series in his career.
Stephen A. Smith then moves into a part of the GOAT debate that he believes gets overlooked constantly, how players were actually viewed during their own era. Because to him, greatness is not only about stats, rings, or longevity. It's also about perception, fear, consensus, the feeling around the league when a player was at his absolute peak. And this is where he believes Michael Jordan separates himself from everyone else. During LeBron James's prime years, there were still ongoing debates about who the best player in basketball actually was. At different moments, people seriously argued for Kobe Bryant, Tim Duncan, and later Stephen Curry as the most dominant force in the league. That doesn't diminish LeBron's greatness, but Stephen A.'s point is that the conversation itself existed. With Jordan, he argues, the uncertainty disappeared. Once Jordan fully took over the league, there wasn't this constant cycle of debate about who the best player alive was. Players knew it. Coaches knew it. Analysts knew it. Opponents felt it every time they stepped on the floor against him. That level of consensus is what Stephen A. keeps emphasizing. To him, true all-time greatness eventually silences argument instead of fueling endless comparison. It becomes undeniable. The league stops questioning who the king is because the answer feels obvious. And in his eyes, Jordan reached that level in a way very few athletes ever have across any sport. That's why he believes the continued debates surrounding LeBron actually say something important. Not that LeBron wasn't dominant, because he absolutely was, but that his greatness has always been analyzed through discussion, context, and comparison rather than universal acceptance. Of course, LeBron supporters would immediately counter that the modern media landscape is completely different now. Social media, non-stop sports television, and 24-hour debate culture make consensus almost impossible for any athlete today. And honestly, that's a fair point too. Because today's stars live under a microscope in a way previous generations never experienced. Every playoff game becomes legacy analysis. Every bad shooting night becomes a national conversation. But Stephen A.'s core argument remains the same. Jordan didn't just dominate statistically, he dominated perception. And to him, that psychological hold over an entire era is part of what makes the GOAT conversation so difficult to overturn.
Their defense from fans and media tells you everything about where he really stands.
Do you understand that during the LeBron James era, there were debates as to whether or not he was the best in the world because Kobe was still playing at one time. Tim Duncan was still playing for a large chunk of that time. And ultimately, Steph Curry has been playing a large chunk of that time. Do you know that when Michael Jordan was playing, there was never a debate ever as to who was the best in the world?
Stephen A. Smith also brings up another point that longtime basketball fans constantly return to when defending Michael Jordan in the GOAT debate. The league already viewed him as the best player alive before he even won his first championship. That's what makes Jordan's rise feel so different historically. By the late 1980s, even with legends like Magic Johnson and Larry Bird still dominating the NBA landscape, Jordan had already become the player everyone feared most. And Stephen A. believes that matters. Because the respect wasn't created by media hype or modern social media narratives. It came directly from players, coaches, and rivals who were competing against him in real time. The famous Larry Bird quote after Jordan exploded against the Boston Celtics, calling him God disguised as Michael Jordan, became larger than just praise. To many fans, it symbolized a changing of the guard. One all-time legend openly acknowledging that another player had reached a level that felt almost impossible to defend. That's the kind of reverence Stephen A. says separated Jordan from everyone else. He didn't have to campaign for validation. He didn't have to constantly explain his greatness publicly. The basketball world recognized it on its own because the dominance felt undeniable every time he stepped on the floor. And in Stephen A.'s eyes, that's part of what makes Jordan's legacy feel so untouchable to older generations of fans. Because before the championships fully stacked up, before the 6 titles, before the complete takeover of the 1990s, there was already this overwhelming belief throughout the league that Jordan was simply different. That doesn't mean LeBron James hasn't earned enormous respect from peers, he absolutely has. But Stephen A.'s argument is that Jordan inspired a unique kind of awe during his rise, almost like the basketball world collectively realized they were watching something historic before the resume was even complete. And that's why so many older players talk about him differently. To them, Jordan didn't just become the standard because of championships. He became the standard because the league itself seemed to acknowledge his superiority long before the trophies fully arrived.